Hello and welcome to another episode here at The Latest with Law Simplified. I am your podcast host, Barry Nally, and today we're joined by another awesome guest. Our guest is a highly respected solicitor's advocate specialising in criminal defence, business crime and regulatory law. He's also a partner at Forbes Solicitors, a leading national law firm in the UK, and heads up the high profile and private crime division within the firm. He has experience of representing thousands of clients, including celebrities and high net worth individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Craig Mackenzie. Hello and welcome to Law Simplified, Craig. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Very excited to have you. How's the day going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Busy, but yeah, it's a good day. Looking forward to the bank holiday weekend.
Oh, yes, definitely. Very much so. Same here. Thankfully, we've got another one the week after, so I think we've got a really nice 2 weeks to look forward to.
We've been spoiled. Yeah.
So I think we should crack on, Craig, and get to know you a little more. So I looked into you, Craig, and I know that you were training to become a forensic scientist.
Yeah.
So what made you then want to become a lawyer?
Well, I was never really, law was never on the agenda when I was a kid. I was more interested in science and maths rather than the traditional subjects that would lead you to the law. And so I did a degree in forensic and biomolecular science. And although I enjoyed it, and I found it very interesting, I think it became very clear to me, if I'm being honest with myself, that I was never going to win the Nobel Prize. There were people on that course whose brains were just wired differently, that they were much better at the academic side of science than perhaps I was. And the eureka kind of moment was when, as part of the degree, we had to do a module in the law of evidence, because ultimately they're training you up to give evidence in court, and so you need to know what's admissible, what's not admissible. And I just found that the law very interesting, but very simple. I like the idea of you having a set of facts, you applying the legislation, the case law, coming to an opinion. Because up until then, I'd been studying equations and maths and studying science books. It's like trying to learn multiple different languages all in one. And I just felt that I got it and it clicked. And I went to Liverpool Crown Court to watch a trial, and I just thought, when I saw the advocates in court, that's what I want to do. I don't want to be stuck in a lab for the rest of my life. I'd like to have a go at that. So that's when I made the decision. I'd like to do that. I spoke to the lecturer. He was a barrister who lectured part-time, and he told me about what was called the CPE at the time. And that's the conversion course. I think it's called something different now, but you basically cram a law degree into a year and you can convert and go on to be either a solicitor or a barrister. So that's the route I took. I did the CPE, and then I was lucky enough to secure a training contract, and the rest is history.
Amazing. It's interesting, actually, Craig. We've had a number of guests who have appeared on our podcast and have said the same, that they were pursuing a different career, but then actually went on to convert into law. And it's a great thing that anybody, even at this stage now, in the current time, is able to do a conversion course and get into law. I think that's the beauty of law, really. And I assume that because you do crime, that a lot of it, you do sometimes deal with, a lot of reports and sort of same similar things that you would do if you were to have gone on to become a forensic scientist. I think you're not missing that much of science, are you? There's lots of expert evidence and things that you have to consider.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a good fit really, because a lot of the sort of scientific things that I learned doing the degree, I can apply it now in my career as a solicitor, because I deal with expert witnesses, I deal with all these issues, but just from a different angle. So it does come in handy from time to time.
Absolutely. And can you give us a brief snapshot? I know you've touched on a little there, the conversion from a science degree to law, but could you give our audiences a brief snapshot into your journey before then and also after you'd actually completed your training contract?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose I don't come from some people might say is a traditional legal background, if such a thing exists anymore. I didn't go to a private school or benefit from an Oxbridge education. I come from Glasgow originally, a place in the East End of Glasgow, and I was fortunate enough to get into university where I studied science. I went into law probably rather naively at the time. I mean, people did tell me it was competitive, and there was all these rumours that for every training contract place or every pupillage, there's 300, 400, 500 people applying. But for some reason, whether it's naivety or just the way, I think that didn't put me off. And I was fortunate enough to be given probably my first big break in the law when I got my training contract, and it was with a chap called Kevin Commons. Now he was an old school criminal lawyer, sharp as a tack, formidable advocate, but quite an intimidating sort of character. You would want to come across him in court. He'd built a very successful practice in the north of England, and so he gave me a training contract and sort of took me under his wing, and I did my training with him. I was probably 1 or 2 years qualified, and unfortunately he got killed. He got shot and murdered.
Oh my God.
I don't know if you remember the Cumbria shootings, Derek Budd.
Oh yes.
So he was the solicitor that got killed, and it was not so long after that I moved to Forbes Solicitors and joined the team here, and I started as a solicitor, and I've taken quite a traditional route. I've gone solicitor, associate, senior associate, and now I'm fortunate enough to be a partner at the firm. And so in terms of a snapshot, that's really, what I mean, where I've come from, where I am now. I mean, at Forbes, I tend to, I'm part of the criminal team, but I tend to deal with more of the private paying side, a lot of the regulatory cases, some of the extremely serious cases. My team looks after that side of the work. But yeah, so that's a snapshot of where I'm up to.
Thank you so much for that. How inspirational. Not forgetting how hard you must have worked throughout that trajectory. So you mentioned that you are now a partner at Forbes Solicitors. Many congratulations, Craig. We saw that you became a partner sort of almost a year ago. A huge moment for you and your family.
Yeah, I suppose it was. It's one of those milestones, I think, in your career, and it's something you sort of aspire to when you go into the law. I mean, for barristers, it's probably getting silk or becoming King's Counsel, whereas whereas for a solicitor, it's making partner. And so, yeah, it is a milestone, and it's something I've wanted and aspired to for a long time. But it's something I'm enjoying, and yeah, onwards and upwards.
How incredible. Many congratulations again from us here at Law Simplified. Now, you've already touched on this. You do head up the high profile and private crime division in Forbes Solicitors. And you've touched on some of the cases, for instance, the regulatory work that you do where you represent clients. Can you give us a bit of a more insight into the other types of cases? Because you do deal with and have actually represented some high profile people. We're going to touch on some cases later on, but could you give us an insight into the types of work that you're doing in that respect?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've represented literally thousands of people. And it's correct, I've represented celebrities, footballers, politicians, other high-profile figures, and I suppose that in some respects is a blessing, but other respects is a curse, because whilst you get to know all the very gory details and you get an insight into these people's life, the curse is that you can't really talk very much about it, because with these type of clients, confidentiality is sacrosanct. You have to be discreet, you have to protect your clients' privacy, and there's always additional complex factors at play when you're dealing with high profile cases, because you're not just given legal advice or legal representation. Quite often you are protecting their reputation, their livelihood, and so I can't really name drop. And if I was to name drop, if I was able to, I probably wouldn't, because it's not really the classy thing to do. But at the moment, I represent someone very well known in the sporting world. I've recently represented a well-known politician. I have just finished representing the director of a top-flight Premiership football club.
Wow.
And so yeah, I am fortunate to represent these type of clients. I mean, I could probably tell you a bit about the first high-profile case I ever dealt with, because it's so long ago now. I was in my 20s, relatively newly qualified, and a client instructed me. He was a Premiership footballer, and it was an extremely high-profile case all over the media. It's pre-social media, so you're talking newspapers and TV. But there were some big names being bandied about. It was a City of London police investigation into corruption within football, and you had names like Harry Redknapp, Willie Mackay, and my client. It was a 2-year investigation. I was up and down to London numerous times. Unfortunately, he avoided any charges. But that was the first real high-profile case, and I got to meet a lot of solicitors that were sort of operating at that level. I got to learn a lot. But it's for me, this job is not just about the sort of high-profile cases. Some of the most interesting cases that I've had have just been ordinary people. I spent many years as a trial advocate, attending magistrates' courts day in, day out, trying the sort of low-level offences, your assaults, thefts, public order offences. And it's probably doing that I learned most about the law and the human condition generally, as opposed to the bigger high-profile cases. And I mean, that's where you learn how to examine a witness, you learn how to deliver a speech, and if you can persuade seasoned magistrates and a district judge, juries are sometimes a breeze. So that's where, for me, I cut my teeth. It's the sort of day in, day out, lower level stuff over a number of years, which has led me to where I am today. I tend to deal with more serious cases today. My caseload at the moment, I've got terrorism, murder, frauds, various regulatory health and safety offences, so it's quite varied. But yeah, I mean, I can give examples of cases, some interesting cases that I've been involved in. I suppose some of my favourite cases would be ones that stick out with me. I mean, there's one in particular I could tell you a bit about. Well, do children listen to your show at all?
We have a variance in the audience. We don't have specifically children, so we're good to go.
Well, one of my favourite cases, it was a long time ago. It's in the magistrate's court. It was a trial. The offence was exposure.
Okay.
Now, at the time, the team I was in, I was basically in the trial advocate. We had a number of trial advocates who would go out and do all the sort of lower level trials, and it was a case of you get into the office early, you divide the files up between your colleagues, and on this particular day I got handed an exposure. Probably not it wouldn't have been my first choice of case. I'd rather have an assault or something like that, but I took the file, had a read, I went over to court, and as I walk into the court waiting room, it's full of people, but there's one guy in particular who he stands out like a sore thumb. If you were to type into Google, what does a sex offender look like, his picture would probably come up. And now, I don't buy into stereotypes or judging people by the way they look, but unfortunately a large proportion of the public do. And in my head, I'm thinking, please don't let that be. Mr. Smith said, please don't let that be. So I book in with the ushers, who I know very well because I'm there day in, day out. I said, have Mr. Smith, we've got a trial. Has he arrived yet? And the usher says, yes, he's here. I said, where is he? And the reply was, he's the guy sat in the corner who looks like a sex offender. So it wasn't a good start. It was always going to be a difficult case, but it was one of those cases that it just kept getting stranger and stranger. I went for a consultation with the chap, and he was adamant that he hadn't done it, he was not guilty, he was having his trial. And of course, as his lawyer, you are bound by your instructions. He was aware that the evidence against it was strong, but you take your instructions and you do the best that you can. And so I got myself into the mindset. We go into court, and it was a case where the complainant was his next door neighbour, and she was very much an upstanding member of the community. She was a wife, mother, she was an NHS nurse, the sort of person that was going to be believed. She had no reason to lie, she was telling the truth. So having discussed this with the client, we decided that it's probably not a good idea for us to go in and start saying that she's lying about it or she's making it up. The case theory was going to have to be she's mistaken to some extent, that she just got it wrong. And so we went in to start the trial. Briefly, the facts alleged were that he had been in his back garden. He had been exposing himself by placing his penis through a hole in the garden fence.
Right.
And and his poor neighbour was just in the kitchen washing up the dishes when she looks out and she sees this penis come through the fence. There was some police evidence. An officer, let's call him Inspector Colombo, had attended the scene and he'd inspected the fence and he'd noted that, I say it gets stranger and stranger in this case, that actually a hole had been cut at just the right height, at sort of waist height. But not only that, it had been sanded down and it had been smoothed out. And there was another hole at sort of which the officer suspected was a peephole. And so this case was turned, and not only had he exposed himself, it was suggested that this was premeditated, it was planned, that he'd gone to a lot of effort to make sure that he didn't get any splinters in places that he wouldn't want splinters. So it was one of those cases where you had to exercise a lot of self-discipline not to laugh or for the proceedings to descend into a circus. But as we sat down, my opponent passes me an application, and it goes back to us because the prosecution now are wanting to introduce evidence of bad character. So that they're saying that this chap has previous for doing something similar in it. And so we start the bad character application, and the previous incident, he'd received a police caution, I think about 2 years before this event, and the prosecutor reads out the facts, and the facts are that he was in his back garden, he was masturbating whilst wearing a lime green dress. Now, the prosecution was saying, well, it's strikingly similar. I had to make some kind of argument against it going in because as if we didn't have enough to contend with, we now had this. And all I could come up with at the time was, well, it's so prejudicial. If it goes in, he's not going to receive a fair trial. And then I suggested, well, it wasn't exactly the same. I think I said something along the lines of, your worships, well, this was a single incident some time ago, and there's absolutely no suggestion in the instant case that he was wearing a lime green dress or, in fact, any other item of women's clothing. And I could see in my peripheral vision my opponent's shoulders moving up and down because they were just holding in, they were sort of laughing to themselves. One of the wingers was choking on the water. The magistrates had to retire to compose themselves, and so the trial continued. I think they allowed the application as they were always going to, and I started cross-examining the complainant, and I didn't have much to go on, as you can imagine. And so I'm taking her through the evidence. I'm saying, also, you were some distance away, it's through a window, do you wear glasses, when's the last time you got your eyes checked? And then I was suggesting alternatives. Well, it could have been a finger, it could have been some sort of animal. And she just turned around and said to me, well, Mr. Mackenzie, I'm a nurse, I'm a wife, I've got 2 teenage boys. I know what a penis looks like. And again, the magistrates are all red-faced, trying to hold in the laughter. One of the magistrates, again, they retired to compose themselves. But what really did it for him was she turned around after saying, I know what a penis looks like, and then says, I know it was him because I saw his hand grasping the top of the fence while he was doing it. And so it just descended into, it was one of the trials that it just, people were just dying to laugh. It descended into somewhat of a by the end of it.
Yeah.
Of course, I lost that case spectacularly. But he did get an extremely lenient sentence. He didn't go to prison. He he got some order with the probation service, so he later admitted to that he'd done it, he wanted help, and I never saw the chap again, so presumably he got the help that he needed to, and I think that's one of my favourite trials that I've done, not because it was a high profile case, but just because it was sort of fun, and it's these sort of things you come across on a daily basis when you're in crime that makes the job worthwhile, really. So yeah, I hope there's no children that listen to your show. But that's one of my favourite cases.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. Quite a bizarre case, really.
It was very bizarre, which is why it's one of my favourites. It was, talk about losing spectacular. It was a case that just went from bad to worse, and couldn't get any stranger.
How do you represent somebody that is guilty?
I don't look at it in that way. I mean, I've never represented someone that told me they were guilty on the basis that I'm going to go before the court and tell the court that they're not guilty. It's just not how it works. People come to me and they say they're not guilty, and it's not for me to judge whether they're guilty or not. I act on instructions, and I believe everyone's entitled to a defence and representation, and I see myself as a minor cog in a much larger machine if I don't defend it to the best of my ability. And you know what I mean? How does anyone know that the outcome is fair and just? If I do my job, the prosecutor does their job. It's justice is in the hands of the jury or the judge, the magistrates. But I see myself as being part of a much bigger machine.
Thank you so much for answering that, Craig, because it's often these types of questions that you see ask lawyers. So I wanted to put that to you, Craig. Thank you for that. Now, you've spent many years doing crime and practising as a lawyer. And as you touched upon just now, actually, that not only are you a solicitor, but you're a solicitor advocate. So you go out and fight trials yourself. Looking back now, many years later, do you ever think or have a moment where you think, perhaps I should have become a scientist? Or do you now, looking back, think, actually, I made the right decision?
I suppose I've had a few wobbles over the years, especially when you're getting phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning to attend police stations in the middle of nowhere when it's raining, it's cold, and so I suppose in those sort of moments I have had a few wobbles thinking, I wish I'd done something else with my life. But the reality is, I know that even if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would probably still be involved in the law and doing what I do in one way or another. I might not be doing as much of it, and I might pick and choose what cases I take on, but it's still sitting in a lab day in, day out, or even sat at a desk in front of a computer screen day in, day out is not something that I would want to spend the rest of my life doing. And fortunately, doing what I do, I get out and about, I meet different people, I go to court, I go to police stations. I don't think I could realistically do anything else and be happy.
Very fulfilling career, actually, as law. Especially when you get a great result, you just feel amazing, don't you, Craig? Top of the world. Now, you've mentioned just a bit ago that you do very serious cases, to the likes of terrorism, murder, and things like that. Can you tell our audiences, I know you can't touch on any of the high-profile cases, but we do want to ask you this, Craig. When you go into prison cells to speak to your client, especially if somebody's charged with murder, do you ever have moments where you think, okay, this is quite sort of, intimidating or not so nice to be in the same room as somebody that perhaps could be very dangerous?
Not really, I suppose, is the answer. What I find is that I'm yet to come across I mean, you see in the media people being portrayed as evil and complete psychopaths. But I'm yet to come across someone that I would put in that category. Most people, even if they've done horrendous things, are pretty glad to see me. I'm the only one really that's interested in helping them. I have had run-ins with various clients with mental health difficulties. I've had a former police officer tried to swing a punch at me. I've had a table thrown at me. I've had various run-ins, but nothing, fortunately, that I've got hurt. But you probably become desensitized to it over a period of time. I think I was probably a bit more reluctant when I was a young 20-something-year-old, whereas now it's, I think most tricky situations and difficult clients you can deal with just by listening to what they've got to say, and you know what I mean, it doesn't have to descend into them going into a rage and attacking you in any way. So I don't, it's not something I really worry about.
Well, that sounds like what you just mentioned about tables being thrown and a punch being thrown at you. Sounds like something from the movies, if I'm honest, Craig. But those are the joys of being a criminal.
Well, yeah, at my very first police station interview that I went to, and I was observing someone else because I was still training, the chap threw a hot cup of hot chocolate all over a police officer. So it was, yeah, so you do come across things like that, but people say I'm quite laid back, so I don't tend to worry too much.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Craig. So earlier this month, you'll have no doubt know that Thomas Cashman, this is a case that made headline news. He was sentenced to 42 years for the heart-wrenching murder of a young, sweet girl, Olivia Pratt Cobell. Can you tell our audiences about that case? Now, we know that currently it's going to Court of Appeal. So very grateful if you would give us a bit of a snapshot into that case for us, please.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my case as such. I did follow it, and I have been on things talking about that case previously. It was an awful case. He was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and various firearms offences. Now, the only sentence for murder is a life imprisonment, but as you will know, the judge has to set a tariff, and the tariff set in his case was 42 years, which is quite a high tariff, one of the highest I've seen recently. I am aware that I think he has lodged an appeal. I'm not sure if he's lodged the appeal or whether it was someone else that's lodged the appeal for it being too lenient, but I know an appeal has gone in. My view in relation to the sentence is that, I mean, legally at least, I think the sentence reflects the severity of the crimes committed. I don't think it will be changed on appeal. And I say legally, it reflects the seriousness because, of course, no sentence or punishment within the court's power to impose could ever seek to in some way put a value on the loss of human life. The courts are constrained by the statutory framework under which they operate. They have to follow guidelines, which are all set by Parliament. I mean, the starting point for any murder when setting a tariff that involves a firearm is 30 years. But the judge in this case, he has had to bear in mind that this, from what I've read, appears to have been a pre-planned, premeditated execution. He took two guns with him. There was an innocent young child murdered in her own home, and she may not have been the intended victim, but that doesn't really offer any mitigation because he went there kill someone. There was other offences, there's attempted murder, there's a wounding, there's firearms offences. So I think the judge, taking into account totality, he's got the sentence really right. So I can't imagine there being any interference with it. That's my view from what I've read in terms of the sentence. And I know there was a lot of talk about the fact that Cashman himself didn't appear for that sentencing hearing, and there's been calls for politicians to try and change the law in some way to ensure that people appear to be sentenced in the future. Whether they'll get anywhere with that, it is questionable. Because I think it was the situation where he's just refused to go into court. In fact, I've heard that one of the reasons his advocate gave was that when he was convicted, the prosecution, the CPS and the police were singing "We Are the Champions," which seems very strange to me. I can't imagine that ever happening in a Crown Court, but that was the reason he gave. But it's not uncommon for defendants to refuse to go into court, and there's very little in reality that anyone can do about that, because the alternative would be for the judge to defer the matter to the prison. The prison would have to conduct risk assessments. They can use force, but how distressing would it be for someone to be dragged into court shouting at the family of the victim? They're not going to, in those circumstances, I would imagine, be very respectful and just take it on the chin. So it's a difficult issue, and I don't see really anything that would adequately deal with, forcing people to face the sentence in court if they decide not to.
Thank you so much for that, Craig. We've sort of followed the case a little as well. I think the situation now, as we understand it, that there are calls for him to receive a whole life order. Are you able to tell our audiences just very briefly what a whole life order is?
Yeah, a whole life order basically means that he would never get out. Some people get mixed up. They think that they see 42 years and they think that that's the sentence. It's not. It's a life sentence. It just means that after 42 years, he can apply for parole. There's no guarantee that he will ever get parole. He will have to convince the parole board that he's not a danger. Now, a whole life sentence essentially takes that away. So he's basically going to be locked up for the rest of his life. But yeah, it's very rare to impose a whole life sentence, and there's some relatively strict criteria on the guidelines, from what I remember, that the judge would have to take into account. I think one of the criteria is killing a child, but I think the way the judge dealt with this case is he took into account the fact that it wasn't a case of someone going and intentionally killing a child. But although it's no mitigation, it's not a case of him targeting, an innocent child. It was very different from that. Or someone, for example, on the guidance, I think it's someone who kills more than one person. There's some very strict criteria, and yeah, I'd imagine there's probably been a referral to the Attorney General to see whether, under the unduly lenient sentences scheme, to see whether it goes to the Court of Appeal. Personally, I don't think it will, but I could be wrong. We'll see what happens.
Thank you so much for that, Craig, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can I ask you very lastly, just for some closing comments for aspiring solicitors or any other professionals or solicitors that are watching this podcast, please?
If it's something you want to do, and you're interested in criminal law or going into the law, it is a very rewarding career. Don't give up. Don't let people, naysayers, put you off, because if you want it enough and you keep at it, most people eventually get there and they qualify, and it can be a very fulfilling career.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. Thank you so much again for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Craig Mackenzie. Please do like this video and subscribe to our channel, because we're going to be bringing on some exciting guests. Do head onto our website at www.law-simplified.co.uk to check out our resources, and do follow us on all the social media platforms. We're literally everywhere. We're also going to start doing TikTok lives, so do please join me on that. Do remember, if you need a lawyer, please head onto our website, complete a contact form, and we'll get you in touch with a law firm in a jiffy. Whatever you do, please do stay in contact with the law. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your podcast host, Farin Ali. Until I see you on the next one.